Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into, well, a really fundamental piece of physics. Chapter 33 of the Feynman Lectures, Volume 1. It's all about polarization.
Right. And our goal here is to really get into the concepts, give you that clarity Feynman is so famous for, especially if you're grappling with this at, say, the college level.
We often think about light just,
Mm,
moving forward, where it's going. But Feynman shifts the focus, doesn't he? He makes us ask, how does it wiggle?
exactly. He drills down on the electric field vector. It's oscillating, vibrating, in a plane that's perpendicular to the direction the light is traveling, and how it vibrates in that plane. That's polarization.
And understanding that wiggle is key, because it affects how light interacts with basically everything. It's not just abstract theory.
Not at all. It's crucial for understanding reflections, scattering, how filters work, even things like crystal optics, often glossed over in intro courses, but really vital for the real world.
Okay, so let's unpack that wiggling electric vector. Feynman describes it as the result of two independent oscillations, right? Like an X and a Y component.
That's the picture. Imagine two vibrations happening at the same time, same frequency, but maybe different strengths, different timings, perpendicular to each other.
How do we visualize what that looks like overall?
Feynman uses this great analogy. Think of the tip of that electric vector, like a little point tracing out a shape in that perpendicular plane, like watching a ball on a string from above.
Okay.
So if the X and Y wiggles are perfectly in sync in phase, or exactly 180 degrees out, they just move back and forth together.
So the ball just traces a straight line.
Precisely. That's linearly polarized light, the simplest case.
But that sounds too simple to be the only option.
Oh, it definitely is. Most of the time, the amplitudes won't be perfectly matched or the phases will be off. And when that happens, the tip traces out an ellipse. That's elliptically polarized light. It's really the general case.
Okay, so elliptical is the norm. What about the special case we hear a lot about? Circular.
Right, circularly polarized light. That happens under very specific conditions. The X and Y components have to have the exact same amplitude, and they have to be exactly 90 degrees out of phase. One lags the other by a quarter cycle.
And that makes the tip trace a perfect circle instead of an ellipse.
A perfect circle. And Feynman even gives us conventions right hand, meaning clockwise as it comes towards you, and left hand counterclockwise. You need a standard way to talk about it.
So if elliptical is general and linear and circular are special cases, what about normal light? Sunlight, light from a bulb. We call that unpolarized. How does that fit?
Good question. Unpolarized light is essentially just chaos, in a sense. The polarization state, the direction of that ellipse or line, is changing incredibly rapidly and randomly.
How rapidly?
We're talking timescales of maybe 10 to the minus 8 seconds, 10 nanoseconds. So the phase relationship between the X and Y components isn't stable at all. It averages out over any time you can measure, looking like no preferred direction.
Ah, okay. So it has polarization, but it changes too fast to pin down.
You could think of it that way, yeah. It's a soup of rapidly changing polarization states.
Right. Now we know what it is. How do we get polarized light? Let's talk sources. Scattering seems like a big one.
Definitely. Think about sunlight hitting the atmosphere. That light hits molecules, essentially tiny charged particles. The electric field of the light wave makes these charges wiggle, vibrate.
Okay, makes sense.
Now, here's the crucial physics bit. An oscillating charge cannot radiate energy along the direction of its oscillation.
Oh, interesting. Like it can't throw a ball straight forward if it's shaking side to side.
Sort of, yeah. So imagine you're looking up at the sky, but off to the side, say 90 degrees away from the sun. The sunlight comes in, makes the air molecules vibrate, some up and down relative to you, some towards and away from you.
Right.
But those molecules vibrating directly towards or away from your eye cannot send light to your eye. Only the vibrations happening perpendicular to your line of sight can radiate towards you.
So the light you see coming from that patch of sky is missing one direction of vibration. It's polarized.
Exactly. That's why the blue sky is partially polarized, especially at 90 degrees from the sun. The scattering process itself acts as a polarizer.
That's a really neat natural phenomenon. But we also make artificial polarizers, right? Like in sunglasses or camera filters, Polaroid stuff.
Yes, those are engineered materials. Often they contain tiny, elongated crystals or molecules that are all carefully aligned. Think of them like microscopic Venetian blinds or jail bars.
Okay, lined up bars, what do they do?
They're designed to strongly absorb light whose electric field vector is oscillating parallel to those bars. But if the light is oscillating perpendicular to the bars, it passes right through.
So it filters out one direction of polarization. And there's a mathematical way to describe how much gets through, isn't there? Malice's law.
That's the one. It quantifies it. If you have linearly polarized light hitting a polarizer, the intensity, the energy that gets through isn't just proportional to the angle. It's proportional to the square of the cosine of the angle between the light's polarization and the polarizer's transmission axis.
Cosine squared. So if they're aligned, cosine is 1, squared is 1 full intensity. If they're perpendicular, cosine is 0, squared is 0, nothing gets through.
Correct. And in between, it follows that cosine squared curve. Small angles don't block much, but as you rotate towards 90 degrees, the blocking effect gets much stronger, much faster. It's not linear at all.
Got it. Now, another way polarization shows up, especially relevant for things like glare reduction, reflection, Brewster's angle.
Ah, yes,
Yeah.
Brewster's angle. This is another fascinating case. When unpolarized light hits a surface, like water or glass, some reflects and some refracts into the material.
Right.
At one specific angle of incidence, called Brewster's angle, something amazing happens. The reflected light becomes perfectly linearly polarized, and it's polarized parallel to the surface.
Perfectly. Why at that specific angle?
Because at that exact angle, the reflected ray and the refracted ray happen to be exactly 90 degrees apart from each other.
Okay, and why does that 90-degree separation matter?
It goes back to the charges vibrating in the material at the surface. Because of that 90-degree geometry, the charges simply cannot radiate light polarized in a certain direction, the plane of incidence, into the reflected beam. Only the vibrations parallel to the surface can contribute to the reflection.
So the reflection process itself, at that angle, filters out one polarization component, leaving only the other, like the scattering?
Precisely. The geometry forces the polarization. It's a beautiful link between wave optics and the underlying charge behavior.
Okay, let's move from surfaces into the bulk of materials. Some materials treat different polarizations differently. Birefringence.
Yes, birefringence or double refraction. This happens in materials, typically crystals like calcite or quartz, where the internal structure isn't the same in all directions. They're anisotropic.
Meaning the molecules are arranged asymmetrically.
Exactly. Think of the crystal having a special direction, an optic axis. Light polarized parallel to this axis might travel at one speed, while light polarized perpendicular to it travels at a different speed.
So the refractive index actually depends on the polarization direction.
Wow, it does. Two different speeds mean two different indices of refraction for the same material, depending purely on the light's polarization relative to the crystal structure.
And this leads to useful devices like wave plates. You mentioned a quarter wave plate.
Right. A quarter wave plate is a piece of birefringent material that's cut to a very specific thickness. It's engineered so that the difference in speed between the two polarization components causes one to lag behind the other by exactly 1/4 of a wavelength as they pass through.
A quarter wavelength lag. That's a 90-degree phase shift.
Precisely. Remember our definition of circularly polarized light. Equal amplitudes, 90 degrees out of phase.
So if you send linearly polarized light, which has components in phase, into a quarter wave plate oriented correctly,
it introduces that 90-degree phase lag, and boom, out comes circularly polarized light, or vice versa, it can turn circular into linear. They're incredibly useful in optics labs.
the workhorse, as you said. Okay, moving from ordered crystals to maybe liquids. Feynman talks about optical activity.
Yeah, things like sugar solutions, corn syrup, turpentine. These substances do something different. They rotate the plane of polarization of linearly polarized light as it passes through.
They twist it. Why?
It's down to the shape of the molecules themselves. They are chiral, meaning they have a handedness, like your left and right hands. They lack mirror symmetry. Think of helical or spiral shapes.
Like little corkscrews?
Kind of. And because of this inherent structural twist, the light's electric field interacts with the medium in a way that gradually rotates its plane of polarization, degree by degree, as it travels further.
Fascinating. And then there's the really striking visual demonstration with calcite or Iceland spar, anomalous refraction.
Oh, Iceland spar is classic. You put it over text and you see double. It takes a single incoming beam of unpolarized light and splits it into two separate beams.
Two beams at.
Because of its birefringence. One beam behaves as you'd expect, following Snell's law of refraction. That's called the ordinary ray, or O ray. Its speed is the same regardless of direction in the crystal.
Okay, ordinary. What's the other one?
The extraordinary ray, or E ray. Its speed depends on the direction it travels relative to the crystal's optic axis. Because its speed changes with direction, it doesn't obey the simple version of Snell's law.
And these two rays are polarized differently.
Orthogonally polarized. perpendicular to each other. The crystal physically separates the light based on its polarization state relative to the internal structure. It's a very direct demonstration of polarization affecting propagation speed.
Amazing. Okay, so we've seen how polarization arises, how it's filtered, how materials interact with it. Feynman then circles back to reflection, but quantitatively, right, with Fresnel's equations.
Yes, he derives the formulas that tell you exactly how much light amplitude is reflected and transmitted at an interface, and crucially, how it depends on the polarization.
It's not just whether it reflects, but the amount.
Right. The analysis breaks the incoming light's electric field into two components. One, oscillating perpendicular, normal, to the plane of incidence, and one, oscillating parallel to the plane of incidence.
Remind us what the plane of incidence is.
It's just the imaginary flat plane that contains the incoming light ray, the reflected ray, the refracted ray, and the line perpendicular to the surface, the normal.
Got it. So do these two components reflect equally?
Generally, no. That's the key insight from Fresnel's formulas. The reflection coefficient, the ratio of reflected amplitude to incident amplitude, is different for the parallel component compared to the perpendicular component, and it changes with the angle of incidence.
And how does this connect back to Brewster's angle?
Beautifully. The derived equations show mathematically that when the angle of incidence is such that the reflected and refracted rays are 90 degrees apart, which is Brewster's angle, the reflection coefficient for the component polarized parallel to the plane of incidence goes exactly to 0.
0, meaning none of that component reflects.
None of it. Only the perpendicular component reflects at that angle. So the reflected light must be perfectly linearly polarized, perpendicular to the plane of incidence, which means parallel to the surface itself. The math rigorously confirms the physical argument we made earlier about the vibrating charges.
It all ties together. So let's recap. We started with the idea that light isn't just moving forward, its electric vector is oscillating perpendicular to that motion. That oscillation's direction and shape is polarization.
We saw how natural processes like scattering create polarized light, and how engineered filters, polarizers, can select specific polarizations using Malice's law. Reflection at Brewster's angle is another key mechanism.
Then we looked inside materials, birefringence, and crystals splitting light based on polarization, leading to things like quarter wave plates, and optical activity in chiral molecules rotating the polarization plane.
And finally, the Fresnel equations give us the quantitative details of reflection, confirming why Brewster's angle produces perfectly polarized light.
It really paints a complete picture. Now, for a final thought to leave our listeners with, Feynman connects polarization to something even deeper, doesn't he?
He does. It touches on fundamental physics. Consider circularly polarized light again. It's not just an oscillating vector. It carries angular momentum. When that light gets absorbed by something, it doesn't just transfer energy. It transfers a tiny amount of twist, of rotation.
Like photons having spin.
Exactly. The angular momentum carried is related to the energy, E, and the frequency, omega. Specifically, it's E divided by U. So the polarization state, this seemingly simple oscillation direction, is directly linked to a fundamental mechanical property, angular momentum. It hints at the quantum nature of light even within this classical description, something to definitely explore further.
A fantastic point to end on. That wraps up our deep dive into Feynman's take on polarization. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.